Hello and welcome to Eastern Europe Review, a program focusing on Belarus, Ukraine and Russia. This is a joint production of BELSAT TV and TVP World. My name is Mr. Mickiewicz and let's take a look at the headlines. Crimes without punishment. Wagner mercenaries who killed in war continue to kill in peacetime.
They shouldn't be on Belarusian territory at all, and if they are, law enforcement agencies should control them.
Ukrainians return to Izium, rebuilding a city scarred by Russian occupation.
The state provides funding, but in most cases, people invest their own money, not in a coffee shop, but, in my opinion, in the city.
25 years after Russian apartment bombings, unanswered questions persist.
This is a great tragedy, and now we need to help those people who are around us. Overall, this is a war against our country.
The number of victims linked to the Russian private military company Wagner continues to grow, not only on the battlefield, but now in peacetime as well. After returning from the front lines, Wagner mercenaries, many of whom have a criminal history, continue to steal, rape and kill. Meanwhile, Alexander Lukashenko has openly welcomed Wagner forces, offering them a warm reception and creating special conditions for them to settle in Belarus. Their presence there has left local residents living in fear.
Sergei Kozlov, a fighter of Wagner's PMC, will return to the penal colony. The Omsk Regional Court in Russia sentenced the former stormtrooper to 19 years for a particularly cruel murder of his pregnant partner, 18-year-old Daria Styobina. The medical examiner found 138 injuries on the victim's body, including a brain injury, a ruptured liver, and a closed abdominal injury. According to court documents, Kozlov killed his partner because of a music speaker which she had allegedly broken by accident.
The conditions of military operations seem to legitimize violence and even murder, and in some cases glorify it. It's also important to consider the serious psychological impact of war, which often results in PTSD.
The criminal lived a trouble-free life for only 6 months. Before joining PMC Wagner in 2022, Sergei Kozlov had been convicted 9 times. At the time of his recruitment, he was serving a sentence of 6.5 years. Many Russian criminals, including repeat offenders, have been pardoned for their participation in the war in Ukraine. It became widely known in the first year of the full-scale war that a private military company was consistently recruiting mercenaries from Russian prisons.
They think, well, we're back. We can punch someone in the face or kill someone. But I fought in the war. If I go back to prison, I'll be pardoned again, and I'll be able to return to the front.
After returning from the front, former Wagner fighter Ivan Rosomahin was sentenced to 23 years for the brutal murder of an 85-year-old woman. But he spent only 8 days behind bars. While in the penal colony, he signed a contract again and went back to war. If Ivan completes his contract, he will be pardoned and enjoy freedom. In 2020, he was convicted for murder and robbery. This situation poses an even greater danger to the people of Belarus, where part of the Wagner PMC is stationed at the invitation of dictator Lukashenko.
We'll take you to Belarus. We guarantee complete safety for Wagner fighters in Belarus.
Russian mercenaries from the trenches are also arriving in Belarusian cities. Some are seeking a better life there. Some mercenaries have stayed behind after the disbandment of the PMC camp, which had been located near the village of Tsel for several months.
These people are far more trained in handling and using firearms in real combat operations than law enforcement officers in Belarus. They shouldn't be on Belarusian territory at all, and if they are, law enforcement agencies should control them.
according to former Belarusian Minister of Culture and now opposition politician Pavel Latushka. Last year, some Wagner fighters received Belarusian passports. If this is true, Lukashenko has created quite favorable conditions for real criminals.
He then needed to integrate people from Wagner PMC to train the so-called Belarusian security forces in real combat. It was easier and cheaper. Nothing else happened to them.
There is no oversight of Wagner PMC fighters by psychologists, psychiatrists, or security forces in Belarus.
2 years ago, Ukrainian forces successfully liberated the city of Izium in the Kharkiv region from Russian occupation. At the time of its reclamation, only 13,000 residents remained out of a pre-war population of 52,000. Today, this number has doubled, with more people slowly returning to their homes. While most government institutions have resumed operations, the local court has yet to reopen. What progress has the city made in its rebuilding efforts, and what does life in Izium look like now?
This is Volodymyr Matsokin, deputy head of the Izium City Military Administration. Our film crew met him at one of the coffee shops that opened up after the city's liberation.
This has happened very often recently. A person investing their own money. Of course, we have programs where the state provides funding, but in most cases, people invest their own money, not in a coffee shop, but, in my opinion, in the city.
22-year-old waitress Daria is a local resident. She and her parents survived the 2022 occupation of Izium. Daria says she did not leave the shelter because she was very scared.
These feelings cannot be described. It was really scary. I didn't leave the basement at all.
Residents began to return to the city immediately after the centralized restoration of the power grid, gas pipeline, and water supply. This process took almost a year. On premises damaged by Russian missile attacks, Olga has reopened the doors of her beauty salon.
We arrived, restored it a little bit, and started working. What could we do? There were no options. Everything inside was damaged, so everything had to be done from scratch.
During the occupation of Izium from February to September 2022, this pedestrian bridge was the only way to connect the central part of the city with the residential area. From the bridge, you can clearly see a church and a high school in ruins, and a residential building destroyed by a Russian bomber. At the same time, several blocks away, another building has been partly restored. Residents of the building are saying that the only thing missing is the heating.
A rocket fell here and another one fell there. All of this was bombed out here. If they provide us with the heating, we'll have a good winter.
Tatiana Yakovlevna's neighbor, Alexander Anatolievich, recalls how 27 residents of the building hid in this basement from Russian attacks. He says he wouldn't like to go back to that time.
I don't want to go to the basement anymore. We need to kick the Russians out of the country, and hopefully everything will be fine.
According to local authorities, 80% of multi-story residential buildings and 30% of single-family houses were destroyed in Izium during the occupation. In 2023, only 12 buildings were completely restored, with 4 more restored this year. It often happens that restored and damaged buildings stand next to each other. A pensioner living nearby, Alla Andreevna, sells produce from her garden because her pension is not enough to make ends meet.
Very few people are here. At least we sell something. Grandpa catches fish and I dry it myself. I do a bit of trading.
Now, the main problem in Izium is finding employment. According to Volodymyr Matsokin, most of the people who have returned to the city work in the utilities sector and in the restoration of the city.
In Russia, people are remembering the victims of the devastating apartment bombings that occurred 25 years ago. A series of explosions destroyed residential buildings in several cities, claiming the lives of hundreds. The attacks were officially blamed on Chechen separatists, which ignited a new war in the North Caucasus and marked the beginning of Vladimir Putin's rise to power. However, to this day, no concrete evidence has been presented linking Chechen forces to the bombings. Many independent observers and analysts have raised serious doubts, suggesting instead that Russian special services may have orchestrated the attacks to help secure Putin's position as president.
On the night of September the 9th, 1999, a terrible explosion completely destroyed two entrances of a 9-story building in Moscow. The blast killed 106 people and injured more than 600. Politicians and authorities immediately declared it a terrorist attack. This incident was the first in a series of similar tragedies.
This is a great tragedy, and now we need to help those people who are around us. Overall, this is a war against our country.
Just a few days later, another attack occurred claiming the lives of 124 people. Eyewitnesses again reported that a sugar storage facility had been set up on the first floor of a residential building in Moscow. Law enforcement officials confirmed that the sugar sacks contained hexogen. 2 days later, Russia's newly appointed Prime Minister Vladimir Putin declared that Chechen separatists were responsible for the explosions. Before this, the Kremlin had been at war with Chechnya, which had been demanding independence, though peace had been established 3 years earlier.
For us, it's now absolutely clear that terrorists are hiding in the Chechen Republic and are being supported by extremist forces there.
This incident became the catalyst for the declaration of the Second Chechen War. However, subsequent events raised doubts whether the terrorists were truly based in Chechnya. On September the 22nd, in the town of Ryazan, located 200 kilometers from Moscow, local residents observed suspicious individuals carrying bags into a building's cellar late in the evening. Eyewitnesses contacted the police, who arrived at the scene and discovered explosives and timers already in place.
Work in the fight against the terrorists is already underway, and there are positive developments. In particular, this can be seen by the preventing of the explosion of a residential building yesterday in Ryazan.
The police in Ryazan quickly detained those responsible for planting the explosives. During the interrogation, they presented IDs identifying them as employees of the Federal Security Service. The Kremlin urgently demanded their release. FSB head Nikolai Patrushev claimed it was merely an exercise and that the bags contained sugar.
The FSB officers and law enforcers didn't refute anything at that time. In my opinion, this is a confession. They are murderers. If Russian society had reacted as it should have done at the time, there wouldn't have been hundreds of thousands of deaths, including in Syria, over a quarter of a century of Putin's rule.
Most Russians, influenced by state propaganda, believed that Chechen separatists were responsible for the apartment bombings, which led to the start of the war against Chechnya. Putin, who had already announced his intention to run for president, consistently emphasized the fight against terrorism. This narrative helped him build a reputation as a strong leader determined to restore order in Russia.
The episodes with the apartment block bombings were part of a general operation by the security forces intended to precede the start of the Second Chechen War, which was meant to increase Putin's chances of winning the election.
Later, authorities announced the capture and conviction of separatists allegedly responsible for the bombings, although none of them were of Chechen origin.
That's all for today. Eastern Europe Review will be back next Sunday. Please stay with TVP World and stand with Ukraine.